Do you know what it is? Do you know what's really annoying me? Trying to have a rational conversation with people, trying to make rational points, make an attempt to have ask valid questions. Just say, look, I've got questions. This is what I'm thinking. And for people to write you off for asking questions or to insult you for asking questions,
yeah.
just I mean, Danny's brilliant at this. He's like, Pete, just do it on the podcast. There's never a scenario where you're sat here and having a long form conversation. You're asking those questions. Does somebody insult you or call you a status cuck or all that bullshit? They work through. You work through it together. Every time you do it on Twitter, it just descends into bullshit.
And we commonly disagree on things. I think you have a little bit more trust in the state than I do. I'm like a pretty diehard libertarian.
Yep.
And despite that, I think we have good conversations on what Bitcoin did and also on Twitter. It's not like we go attack each other. And I think that nuance of just having a friendly debate keeps things civil and it keeps the argument tighter versus like resorting to ad hominem attacks, which I notice is pretty frequent for both you and myself in terms of other people criticizing our thoughts, or they'll resort to an ad hominem attack immediately, or they'll resort to other techniques that are like straw man, et cetera. So,
wow, even more extreme, like attempts to cancel me. I had somebody get in touch with me this week, and she was like, "Oh, I've heard some accusations about you." I was like, "Oh, please tell me." It's like, "Yeah, you assaulted a woman." I was like, "Huh? Yeah, I've heard about this." I was like, "Pretty sure I haven't." And then she said, "Yeah, Laura Loomer in front of Jack Dorsey." I was like, "Hold on a second. I did not assault Laura Loomer. Laura Loomer was about to get dragged away by security, yelling at Jack Dorsey. I went and stood in front of her. I think I touched her arms and just tried to calm her down."
Oh, she was the one who yelled at Jack at Bitcoin 2021, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But these people were like saying, "Yeah, you shouldn't talk to him. He's this, he's that. He was a drug addict. He got divorced. He assaulted a woman." They did this list. It's like, hold on a second. Yeah, I got divorced. Okay. And yes, I was an addict. I've recovered from that. Shouldn't we celebrate that? But
of course.
But there's these attempts to cancel people within the Bitcoin world is really weird. And the bigger point on this all damn for me is like, hold on a second. There's a splintering going on here when actually, if you go down, I had somebody talk to me about first principles this week. If you go back to first principles, we're all on the same team with Bitcoin. Course. We're all on the same team. But if we splinter and we attack each other, what are we actually doing? Are we holding back the growth of Bitcoin? Are we holding back education? Are we confusing new people coming in? Do we look like a deranged bunch of morons who are going to dogpile in on every criticism? By the way, I know everything I'm talking about here, that I have some hypocrisies. We're all learning, but what are we doing here?
Yeah, I think the friendly fire is how I call it. The friendly fire in the Bitcoin ecosystem has reached, I think, a really bad point to where the toxicity in Bitcoin existed for a good reason, to preserve some of Bitcoin's cultural values, which those cultural values then enforce the preservation of more important things like the 21 million hard cap and keeping the block size smaller or reducing the amount of influence companies and powerful individuals have over the protocol. So that intense, or AKA toxic community, had a purpose, back in the block size wars and for other things. That has turned to, I would say, an autoimmune issue. We're starting to attack its own body because there actually isn't that big of a threat to Bitcoin. There's no Bitcoin Cash. There is no, I would say, major threat externally. I mean, sure, you've got other protocols, but none of them compete to be a sound money as well as Bitcoin does. And so without having an attacker to fight against, the white blood cells start to attack the own body.
There's a couple of interesting points on that. And again, I agree. But I was around during the block size wars. I was new. I didn't understand it. But I'm not even sure the word toxic is right. It wasn't a toxicity. It was a firm holding of the line. The likes of John Carvalho, Adam Back, Eric Lombroso, people they held the line. They held it firm. What we have now is there's this new influx of people who probably weren't even there during the block size wars. They all seem to have a name like .hodl. They call themselves the plebs. Sorry. And as a group, they've almost become like the nanny state. It's outside of Bitcoin. they say we're here to defend Bitcoin, but it's like, I actually don't care about shitcoins. I cared about Bitcoin Cash, and I would care about that kind of, that's a direct attack on Bitcoin. All right, shitcoin, I don't even care. Actually, I want to be friends with them because I want them coming into Bitcoin, right?
Totally.
But now it's like every opinion you hold, they're coming at you if it's not the right opinion. And there's a really important point on this. Based on the applications for people who want to be guests on the show, or the people I'm talking to, or the people who email me, there's been an influx of moderates and lefties coming into Bitcoin. And there are solid arguments for why people on the left should care about Bitcoin.
Totally. And I think that, Bitcoin's original core values are very libertarian, and they're somewhat inherent because it's about freedom to transact with whomever you want. So whether you be left or right, Bitcoin is a very libertarian foundational ideology. It's very permissive, which libertarian ideology is the only most permissive ideology out there. What you do with you want with your body and with your money. Now, when it comes to the left and the right, I certainly think that, we have seen more left and moderates start to come into Bitcoin, which is encouraging. Bitcoin is for everyone, so that's fantastic.
Means we're winning.
It means we're winning. And also, I think a lot of the Bitcoiners that are more right-leaning, what they don't realize is that this may change how they think. Once they see Bitcoin's permissionless structure, they have to somewhat become libertarian-esque. And same with the conservatives. If the conservatives have certain values that want to restrict people's body or money, well, cool, Bitcoin doesn't care about that. And I think that's what's kind of cool is Bitcoin's a forcing function on both sides to make them bend a little bit more towards what I would call classic liberal values. Liberty, if you will, right? I mean, that's what libertarian ideology is really based on. So I think Bitcoin is a forcing function to force both sides kind of into its gravitas of freedom and sort of that ethos. Now, I think with kind of what recently has happened is there's kind of a weird subset of Bitcoiners who really lean in on a very, very conservative sort of style of Bitcoin, one that leans into very conservative values. That's totally cool. Like, if you want to have that as your narrative and that's what Bitcoin means to you, awesome.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying that's wrong or right, but you shouldn't also say that that's what everyone's values should be when they use Bitcoin. It's funny too, because like I was there 10 years ago. I don't remember almost any of these people that are the more right side. Almost none of them were there. And Bitcoin was, pretty libertarian. I mean, this was like, Bitcoin back in that era was like, cool, man. Like, you want to go buy drugs in Silk Road? That was the mindset, like super, super liberal, Burning Man meets buying drugs in Silk Road meets I've got a AR-15, stay off my property, And so to see it kind of like them start to lean in with different conservative values is very interesting. And then to claim that that has always been Bitcoin's culture, I think is pretty incorrect. I mean, Bitcoin's culture has always been very libertarian.
Yeah, and look, I guess some of it, Dan. I mean, the last 2-3 years it's not been a great time for the state. They've not had a great run this last 2 or 3 years. For me, that doesn't mean burn everything down and start again. It just doesn't. There are things that need fixing. There are things that's clearly wrong. But that's not where I am. But I would recommend anyone struggling with this, go and read The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. There is a reason some people lean conservative, and there's a reason some people lean liberal. Some of it's nature, some of it's nurture. But you are not going to convert somebody into your way of thinking by shouting at them or cancelling them. This whole idea that there's like this world of left wokeism seems to miss. There is some right wokeism going on. There's like anti-woke, and cancel culture exists on the right.
Totally.
Absolutely.
What's really bizarre about, I think, some of the pleb culture, which I respect a lot of it.
Yep.
Don't trust authority figures. Trust, Bitcoin and the Bitcoin network. Those are awesome principles. I think some of the ones I don't agree with are these cancellation sort of like this cancellation mindset of a purity test. What is the most pure version of being a Bitcoiner possible? And so they come up with there's some of, and this doesn't represent all of them, right? I mean, I'm certain, like, who knows which percentage believes in what or whatnot. But here's like good examples. One is, remember, we both have lent out our Bitcoin, like on BlockFi or Celsius or Nexo or let in. it's my Bitcoin. I can do whatever the hell I want with it.
Yeah.
So why would you care if I do that or not? I mean, it's such a bizarre mindset. Or to think that the Bitcoin standard would come into existence and lending would never exist again.
It's also there's these like certain people who are completely crazy who will make things up, like actually make things up.
Oh yeah.
I've had the spook accusation, which has gone on.
That's a popular one now.
Yeah, you're a spook. Okay, why? Well, you must be. Well, why? Come and audit me. Follow me around for a year. See if I'm a spook. Like, but also it's ludicrous even having to prove it. It's like, it's just fucking ludicrous. And then what are the other ones?
Like the status cuck.
Status cuck, yeah. Well, that's language which tries to coerce you away from holding opinions, and it works. Self-censorship is censorship, and
Yep.
I know it works because the emails I get from people saying, don't want to talk about this on Twitter, but I've got these questions. Or can you cover these subjects? Because they know they're going to get yelled at. What were the other ones? Oh, you're
Shitcoin apologist.
yeah, shitcoin apologist. You're paid by Pfizer. I was like, do you know how much they're paying people? It's $1,500. Like, come on, let's get in the real world. Like, it's just lying, canceling, coercing, and abusing. But the look from the outside is terrible.
Agreed. I think that I understand where they come from, by the way, of you see false information. Say an altcoiner comes in and says, Bitcoin's too slow. A classic one, right? Too slow or too expensive. You know, and so immediately after answering this question for the last 10 years, your blood starts to boil a little bit because you're like, I've answered this 1,000 times. And so some of them resort to the more like shouting, angry style. But I find, and I've pushed back on this a lot, as you have, that's not that effective. I mean, Bitcoin's dominance percentage has never been lower. So if it had been effective, then Bitcoin would have like a 99% dominance. A more effective way, so like that's like a quantitative way to qualify, to like look at this. Qualitatively, you know, you don't go to, and they go, well, Bitcoin's so useful that I don't have to be nice because people should just get it. And I'm like, I don't think that happened to you the first time you got it. Or they shit on people because they speculate or they day trade it. No one's perfect. I did too when I first started. That's right. Dan Held wasn't a perfect hodler from the beginning. No one is. We all learned through pain and trial and error. But also from the people that were kind to us and explained things to us. And, you know, I didn't really have many people there to explain things in a simplistic manner. Hence why I care about doing that. The positivity outweighs negativity almost every time. And when we look at like a scenario where, you know, let's say someone made a lot of money on Doge. My narrative now, instead of being like, repent, sell your Dogecoin, which is what these people try to push, sort of the fire and brimstone version of Bitcoin. I tell them, I'm like, cool, we're all guilty of trading. Most 99% of us are probably guilty of trading alts at one point or day trading. And congratulations on making a bunch of money in Dogecoin. But you know what? I'm an old timer. You probably want to roll out those gains into Bitcoin. And that is, I think, going to reach more people than like, repent, you're a terrible person. Because they're not a bad person. They just didn't know. You know, they might have just been trading it for fun, right? It's like
well, they don't care.
Yeah, they don't care. They don't care about the mission of crypto or Bitcoin or whatever. They just care about the mission of like making money. And so they come for the speculation, and to make them stay for the sound money, we need to explain it to them rather than make them feel bad. You're
not going to shout people into changing their opinions. People will you know, they'll turn inwards, they'll back away. But it's like parenting 101. You learn very quickly as a parent, shouting and at your kids doesn't make a difference. It just makes no difference. You have to talk to them. You have to teach them good skills. You have to help them. You have to guide them. There has to be rewards. They have to go out on their own and learn sometimes and make mistakes. But this kind of like shouting and...
It's super strange. I mean, I would love to see a psychological breakdown of who these people are. I mean, I think you've taken the right approach. I've seen some of your comments where you say, you know, like, look, sounds like you have some things you need to work out in your own life. I recommend you do so. You're giving them basically free like psychiatric or psychology.
I've had to pay for one of them's therapy.
Yeah, it's basically therapy because like, I think you're right. I think they're using Bitcoin in that the pleb shield as kind of like an identity. for just being an asshole.
But that becomes a race to the bottom. Like, who can be the biggest asshole?
Yeah, and I've noticed that as well. Like, they're like, the biggest asshole is the one. They respect that because if you're an asshole, you're irreverent, and it means that you don't give a fuck. And it's like, cool, anyone can do that.
Yeah.
So like, in according to your own objective and mission, which is to convert more people into Bitcoin, if you look at your own standard of why you do this, then you realize it's not even being effective. So why would you continue to do it unless you just felt like you were being an asshole and you liked it?
Yeah. Yeah. I even went on. Like, every single one of them, I'm like, I'm always happy to answer questions. I went into a group the other day, like a Spaces of a bunch of very angry people. And I sat there and I was willing to answer question after question. I did. And then you just get some dude come and go, you fat maggot, you fucking gross. Like, just, and it's like, listen, I'm happy to stay. I'll answer any question and admit when I'm wrong. But like, come on.
Yeah.
That fucking fat maggot. Like, oh, Jesus Christ.
What's so weird about you is I think like you're one of the most transparent people I know. You've gone through a lot. We all do. We all have our own life struggles in our journey. But you've been very transparent with some of yours. You know, for example, like your previous drug addiction and stuff.
Can I tell you why, though? The really interesting point on that. Because also, as I was like your attention seeker, I've probably had in the history of Bitcoin maybe 200 people reach out to me who've got substance issues. And they're like, what did you do? I'm struggling. I've got this issue. I'm taking this drug. I'm drinking, like issues. And all I can do is go, okay, I was in the same place. These are the three things that work for me, which was always like, I always said, I went running, I did yoga, and I meditated. And if you need it, there's an app called Calm, which was really good for me. And this is how I got out of it. I also had a job to focus on. Because once you show your vulnerability and your mistakes, other people might approach you. And I don't see a single downside to saying, yeah, I've been through some shit. Yeah, I got divorced and it was awful. Yeah, after that I was addicted to drugs. But this is how I got out of it and rebuilt my life. And there's people who appreciate it, and you can share that with them. And I say that because somebody did it for me when I was in that bad place.
Yep.
Somebody gave me their time, made themselves available. Somebody with a successful podcast made themselves available, and that changed my life. So I was like, and I just think, why are you attacking someone for doing that? Like, do you want other people to suffer? It's
incredibly cruel. And I was, to kind of wrap up what I wanted to say about that is I respect you even more because you say that. I've got all sorts of things, as we all do. But it takes a lot of courage to put that out there. And so I find people that say, like, when I see people say that to you, I block them too.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, oh, fuck this guy.
Yeah.
Like, Peter's a good person. And the fact that he put himself out there is incredibly emotionally vulnerable. And the fact that you're attacking him for recovering, which everyone has their own struggles, is just incredibly cold and just really douchey. So when I see that, I just automatically block him as well.
This kind of conversation has been expanding. We did an interview with Jeff Booth, and we talked about this. We were down, me and Danny were down last night in a bar run by Galaxy. We're doing an event. There's a pleb guy there saying we need to get away from some of this. And it was one of the reasons, I mean, there was a thread this last week from Saifedean, for example. Me and him have history. We're not friends. But I found his thread regarding climate change. I disagreed with it. And I disagreed with it based on my own research. I've interviewed climate scientists. I've spoken to people who are the other side of the discussion, who maybe disagree and doesn't think there is an issue. And I've come to a set of beliefs based on what I've read and who I've spoken to. And so I disagreed with him. I disagreed with the approach in his thread to insult people whilst giving us evidence. So I wrote what I thought was a very considered thread. This is what I agree with. This is what I disagree with. This is what I don't know. This is what I'm going to do with the information. And even after I wrote it, I actually sat Danny down. I said, look, am I being honest here? Am I being fair? And Danny went through it and said, no, you are. And I published it. And it just got loads of shit back. And I was like, the outside world is looking in. Whether you think you're right or wrong, or I'm right or wrong, the majority of people in the world believe there is a climate issue. If we have a bunch of people who look like crazy denialists, what message is that giving you? It's not that they're not saying you shouldn't hold that opinion. Absolutely hold that opinion. But why are you not allowing your opinion to be challenged? Why are you not willing to discuss it? Because you look fringe and you look crazy.
It's Giacomo, right? What's his name?
Giacomo Zucco.
Giacomo,
yeah.
Giacomo, the Italian guy.
Yeah, he's good.
I like him a lot. And he had a quote from one of the Baltic Honey Badger conferences, which those are actually some of my favorite, by the way. I think we were there.
We were.
Back in 19.
Yeah.
I loved the town. It was really cool. Loved the food, loved the people. I loved the environment with all the Bitcoiners out there. And he had something like that he said, which is, you're free to become irrelevant. I'm not saying this about Saifedean. I respect Saifedean, love his books, like his thoughts on monetary policy and everything else. But when it comes to marketing Bitcoin or prophesizing Bitcoin, if your narrative is what the audience wants to hear about Bitcoin, then you will continue to accrue an audience and grow larger and larger. If the narrative you have about Bitcoin is one that people don't want to hear about, your audience will stay the same or stagnate or grow slower. And so, for example, if I said, like, I believe in the alien theory of Bitcoin, aliens created Bitcoin, and there's no other competing theory, that's it, that's exactly what happened, I'm sure I will find a subset of people that believe in that with me. It won't be a large audience because that's a very niche sort of group. Now, I am not at all saying anyone who's anyone in Bitcoin right now is like at that sort of level. I'm just saying that if they choose their own version of Bitcoin, whether that be the super conservative version of Bitcoin or the super liberal version of Bitcoin, those appeal to certain target segments, right? People who find a narrative that can bridge the gap between both will tap into both segments and grow faster and build a bigger audience than both of those. So what I'm trying to say is that you can have whatever flavor of Bitcoin you want, but if that's not the flavor that people want to hear, then your audience isn't going to grow and your voice is going to stay the same or grow smaller. And we see that happening with some of the, I don't want to call out individuals, but we see that with some sort of narratives, to where if you look at like audience growth on YouTube or Twitter, and you look at it on, like, for example, Social Blade.
Yeah, I know Social Blade.
It's pretty distinctive of who's growing a lot faster and what narratives are propagating. And I would say a less fire and brimstone narrative and a more, hey, come to Bitcoin, hear all the positive things about Bitcoin. Yeah, sure, if you want to go explore that stuff, cool, but you should check out, here's my narrative now too, is, oh, cool, you're excited about these other things? That's great. But you need to learn the basics, so learn about Bitcoin first. When you start with that sort of approach, you're not saying they're a bad person for wanting to learn about the other stuff, but when they learn about Bitcoin in depth, it'll be hard for them to want to go like other things because they'll realize different design parameters of Bitcoin or why Bitcoin's valuable, versus just calling it a shitcoin or saying that sucks. That doesn't really give a newbie the right context in which to make a decision. But going, hey, start with the basics. Bitcoin is Bitcoin is the first, but understand it completely, and that way you can evaluate every other crypto asset you look at.
It's probably a net bad, even for myself. Like, even if I think I'm right, you know, when I sling a bit of mud back, there's a few people you put off, and it's like, actually, my own delivery method can be equally criticized.
What's even worse is that you produce good content. And this erodes from your self-confidence, even if you may not admit it, little tiny bits.
No, it does. It does.
Chips away. And it's not emotionally healthy, is what I've noticed for myself as well. Like, you have all these little chips that chip away at it.
I can see Daddy nodded in the background.
You have all these little chips. It's like little tiny chips, though. It's not like a big chunk out of like let's say your mental health is like a statue of your face. It's like little tiny chips. They're like tiny, tiny chips, but enough of them, you know, it starts to really erode who you are.
Yeah. And we just need to get back to the mission. That's what it needs to be.
Exactly. And getting into the weeds with Pleb 559 is not going to like really be like a good sort of use of your time.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, listen, let's talk about Bitcoin.
Let's talk about Bitcoin. Last couple of times, or two of the more recent shows you've done, well, actually, I didn't probably go back a bit now. We talked about Supercycle. And that's an interesting concept because I know you're either the first or one of the first to definitely talk about it. I think you would say I'm the first. You're the first person I heard talk about it. Well, thank you. I'm not sure if I'm the first. There's always the who is first to say anything, but I did mention in 2019, which was one of the first mentions.
And we talked about it a lot, and we talked about it again, and I think it's right to talk about it again, because it's an interesting concept, because the Bitcoin chart reflects cycles. And everybody, a lot of people believe this year was going to be the same. Bitcoin was going to go to $150,000 to $200,000. It didn't. It's done a lot of weird stuff, and the cycle might be breaking. Now, if the cycle breaks into a super cycle, or if the cycle breaks into just something a little more irregular, I personally think it's good for Bitcoin. Having some kind of mapped out vision where it's going to go and everyone following that, I don't think is good. I think we need the asset to mature and its pricing model to mature. So I'm super interested in the super cycle. Now, I've got a lot of new listeners. They might not have heard the previous two shows. I would recommend go onto the website, look up Dan Howe, look up the super cycle. But just for the sake of those people, remind what the super cycle thesis is.
Yeah, so the Supercycle's thesis, as I phrased it in 2019, and this was before 2020 when we had COVID, was we have a sort of perfect storm where we have governments with reckless monetary policy, we have Bitcoin adoption that has never been higher, and the infrastructure to support mainstream Bitcoin adoption in terms of billions of people getting in. We have trust in governments and institutions at all-time lows, including universities, military, and journalists and politics. And so all of that combined, and we were at a bear market then. I was like, if a bull market coincides with a huge jump in loss of faith with institutions or another financial crisis, we could have a super cycle. So that was the original sort of super cycle thesis, as I mentioned in 2019 on Anita Pasha's podcast. And so basically what that describes, though, the outcome of that, well, what does that mean? That means that this cycle would be different than the other cycles. And so I described it as being a either more intense bull run or like a bull run, muted bear market, and then maybe another immediate bull run, kind of like a 2013. And so at first we thought we were mimicking 2013. We had the top, went down a little, we had up to 69,000 really fast, then down a little bit, and then it started to run back up.
A little bit, 55%, not a little bit.
It's Bitcoin, so 55, you know, versus an 85% drawdown, which is like a typical bear market drawdown. So I would still consider that muted versus another Bitcoin cycle because 40%, 50% drops are somewhat common.
Yeah.
And so we all thought like it might look like 2013. We haven't seen that happen, but we are seeing if we are in a bear market or we're still maybe in an elongated bull market, we're definitely seeing that the cycle is far different. Now, some folks would say this does look like an obvious pattern, that this isn't a super cycle at all, that it's actually mimicking the cycles elongating, which is another theory as well, that if we look at the cycles over time, they have been elongating in terms of like peak to trough. And so their sort of prediction is that late 2022 is when we see that big bull run. Also could be, I think in the super cycle thesis, we do have the perfect storm, and even a more perfect storm than 2019. I mean, so much has happened. COVID, I think, has given us good reason to doubt our government's capability of handling various parts of our economy and our lives. And with all the money printing that went down too, Bitcoin's utility has never shined brighter. We also have Canada and geopolitical struggles all across the world that I think highlight exactly why Bitcoin is valuable right now.
Dan, every major incident or news event has a Bitcoin angle now.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Because everything seems to be tied to money. Naturally, is how we coordinate. But there's a Bitcoin angle to everything. Hedge against massive inflation, which has some nuance to it, because I think the inflation hedge isn't exactly as people say. I saw a great tweet of this guy who was like, I bought Bitcoin at 69,000 to hedge inflation, and I'm down 55%. But like, it's a long-term hedge, I think. But yeah, Canadian truckers having their funds stolen from them, Ukrainian army fundraising, Russian citizens being essentially cancelled and having the ruble destroyed. Two sides of a war. Both sides of that, both of the people outside of the psychopaths making the decisions have a Bitcoin angle to protect themselves. Every major news story.
Right. And so if we look at when, like, different events where we start to distrust our government don't happen very often. They're sort of like major events. And we've had a lot of them happen in a very short time span. And so in marketing, what we call this is like awareness and consideration level of the marketing funnel. So before you go try a new product or service, you go through different stages. You become aware of the product, you consider the product, and then there's different stages further down the funnel of eventually getting acquired by the product in terms of using the product, and then or like signing up for the product, and then you get activated, which is I've tried out the product and I get why it's valuable. We have a lot of people entering the awareness and consideration stage for Bitcoin right now, which how marketing works typically between like a brand and growth marketing org is that you have brand marketing and growth marketing work together. So growth marketing tries to get them from the awareness level to acquisition, to signing up, or to sometimes they go all the way to activation. So
I know the funnel from my days.
You know the funnel from back in your days. And so this might sound boring, but this is actually how professional marketers think about getting people to try something for the first time. So when it comes to Bitcoin, we have a very large amount of people entering that top of the funnel. Awareness. Almost everyone's aware of Bitcoin now. Everyone.
There's nobody ever. They're like, what do you do? I run a Bitcoin podcast. What's Bitcoin?
Yeah,
I've got questions.
Yeah, we don't hear that anymore.
No.
So we've got almost everyone in the awareness level of the funnel, which is awesome. That's the first step. They have to be aware of it before they can consider it. Now they're starting to trickle into the consideration phase of going, oh, wait a second. Like my money could be seized in Canada or in Ukraine or in Russia. You know, and like, what if that happens in my own country? Maybe this Bitcoin thing is for me. So I think we're seeing en masse a lot of people entering that awareness stage, and maybe more catalyst moments or shocks in the economy or a war shakes them down into the acquisition sort of level where they start to go, okay, I've considered it. I'm ready now. I'm ready to sign up. I'm ready to go try out Bitcoin. And so, you know, it takes them entering those stages before they can start to, you know, buy Bitcoin and Bitcoin's price starts to move up. So I think, you know, we have a large amount of people ready there. And there's certain sort of events that I don't know exactly what those events might be or narratives, but those could push all those people into those lower stages of the funnel. And that means direct price action, the price going up.
Well, this is why the earlier part of our conversation is important, because during that consideration, activation, retention phase, this is where I feel like we're much better if we're unified. We could disagree, but we're kind of unified on the mission, the first principles of Bitcoin, rather than them coming into the consideration activation phase, and it's like a war zone of like bullshit. But you're right, we're there. Anyway, back to the Supercycle.
Yeah, so you know, I think all the elements are here for the Supercycle thesis to be one. It is I think when I laid it out in 2019, it's not only become more apparent that it could be a supercycle in terms of it breaking the normal cycle. Supercycle TLDR is it breaks the normal cycle. And we have a lot of things that make me extremely bullish on Bitcoin. I mean, I've waited 10 years to see moments like this. Did I wish this to happen on the world? Absolutely not. I wish we didn't need to have Bitcoin because we could trust, but we can't.
Well, you would rather Bitcoin was the offense than the defense.
I'd rather the world be such a good place that we don't need something like that, where everyone could have that trust, but we don't. And that's just how the world is. And so with that, I think with Bitcoin, you know, we have such a prime moment for people to realize why it's valuable. I bring that up because a lot of people are like, wait, so you wanted the world to fall apart? And I'm like, no, I don't want the world to fall apart. That's why I caveat with that is I wish I didn't have to want Bitcoin because I wish the world was a better place. But it is what it is, and that's why we need it. And so, yeah, we shouldn't blame Bitcoin. People are like, well, you're profiting off the success of the world collapsing. I'm like, no, I bought an ARK, and I knew the flood was coming, and you didn't plan right. Or I knew we might have a bad harvest season, so I set aside some grain to survive. And so there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing evil about that. There's no profiteering. That's just proper planning.
If anything, you've been out there trying to help people prepare for this.
Precisely. We've been both doing this where thousands of us have been going out, tens of thousands of us have been going out telling people, hey, you might want to consider Bitcoin if this happens.
What would invalidate the thesis? What do you think? Because it's still possible. Look, there's weird things happening right now. We've seen it in some forecourts in London. diesel's hit £2 £2 a
liter, right?
which is works out just shy of $10 a gallon. You know, it's when somebody's like posting images of $6 a gallon. I'm like, hold my beer.
You know, it's hard for me to do Middle Earth calculations between your pounds and dollars, but you know, I get the idea.
Yeah. It's but that's happening. Food prices are going up. Nick Carter talked about this. He talked about when commodities are humans flourish when commodities are cheap and commodities are expensive. But we are headed into weird times, and Bitcoin has proved to be a risk-off asset in these times. So there are still risks to this.
Yeah, and I think the supercycle thesis would be invalidated if my hypothesis that people would find value in Bitcoin or learn about it, given the background that we have here, if people just don't care. And maybe they don't. Maybe it's too complicated to tell people about how sound money works. Maybe there is a limit to how many people actually want to learn. Now, I think some of the core principles that would disagree with that in terms of like saying that, like, I don't think there's a limited TAM here. I think the TAM is the whole population. I think everyone wants to preserve their wealth. I don't think there's anyone on earth who doesn't. And so I find it very hard to believe that the whole world wouldn't want Bitcoin, but I could be wrong. I could be wrong where there may be certain groups that will always trust the government no matter what. And they would always prefer to hold something more stable, even if it loses purchasing power every year, versus something with some volatility. Some people have, and this is actually a good thought experiment, I'd be curious to hear what you think. Mm-hmm. Gold's TAM is only 10 trillion, and not many people own gold today. So why do we believe that more people would own Bitcoin?
It's easier to buy and hold Bitcoin. Way easier. It's a bit more fun to buy and hold Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's a bit more irreverent. It's less old. Yeah.
It's more usable. I mean, it's just a better product.
Totally. But, you know, it is still a derivative sort of not a derivative, but a version 2.0 to where like maybe the TAM is 20 trillion, but it's not. But it's still not like the whole world's wealth flows into Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think the TAM is total addressable market. I think the total addressable market of Bitcoin is magnitudes higher than gold.
And I agree too.
Yeah,
I'm just, you know, we both talked about how being open-minded and like allowing criticism for our own ideas. If the super cycle doesn't play out, I think it would lead me to believe that there isn't as big of a want or need for sound money as I thought.
Yeah, it's a tricky one because there's two angles to wanting sound money. There is the personal protection of your wealth, but there's also the wider macro impact on society. We have a belief that an economy backed by Bitcoin, getting away from cheap credit, wealth disparity, is a better world. But it's always hard to sell people on the ethical side of things. Number go up is a far easier conversation. Although we do have situations now like people fleeing war zones who've lost everything. There's stories out there of people who've fled with Bitcoin. That's been the only money they've been able to take with them. But a lot of us, I don't think, are planning for that scenario. We don't believe it will happen to us.
Yeah, especially in Western developed countries like the United States and Canada, where we believe, well, we have democracy and we have these things and these checks and balances in place. And I think when we look at civilization, it's a thin veneer. I forget who had that quote originally, but civilization can go away in a matter of weeks. Take away electricity and water, see what happens.
Yep.
And so when we look at governments as well, like that, those democratic or those rights that you have can be taken away almost immediately. And that's what's so cool about Bitcoin is through Bitcoin's technology and how it's been built and the social consensus around it, it preserves your rights without a government giving you those rights. As similarly, and I know you disagree, as similarly like guns for that mechanism.
No, I don't. I don't disagree on guns.
Okay.
My view on guns is very simple. I want them in the UK. I don't want them in the UK. We don't have a gun culture. I think a transition from a non-gun culture to a gun culture comes with a lot of risks. It's dangerous. But I fully understand the thesis of why people want guns here. I look at net risk and net benefit, and I don't believe it exists in the UK. And look, I could be wrong.
Yeah, and that's where I think what's cool about both of those, like Bitcoin and guns, is that they're both sort of self-sovereign tools, right? Like You have that gun, you can defend yourself against any attacker, even a state level attacker. And with Bitcoin, same thing. Bitcoin, obviously a little bit more achievable versus a solo AR-15 in a government. But those principles are, I think, human rights issues that you should deserve to defend your body with military level sort of equipment and defend your money with military level sort of equipment.
If I lived here in Texas, I'd own a gun. I'd probably have a couple because it's a different culture. And
yeah, it just depends on your culture. But I mean, I don't want to get into a gun debate of are they good or not. It's just more of like what purposes they serve for like state level sort of protection.
Yeah, I'm also somebody who supports democracy despite its criticisms, and I know it's completely flawed in many ways. But in the UK, there is no appetite for a gun culture. There's just zero. So like, why even? For me, it's a discussion you can have, but if that group of people doesn't want it, then we don't have it. Yeah,
of course. And every group of people can govern themselves any way they like. What's funny is like a lot of people want to lean more socialist. And I'm like, so actually what you mean is you want a libertarian sort of culture, because in libertarian societies, you're free to create any sort of sub-socialist group you want. Cool. You want to have a commune and you guys all split your income equally? Have at it. It's automatically inclusive versus the other one, which isn't, because you're like in a socialist society, they're like, you have to share your wealth. You're not allowed to have your own income, or you're not allowed to have your own income to a certain extent. And so, yeah, I think that any society is free to choose what they like and people can opt in or out. And that's the whole point of being able to join different states or join different countries. And so, yeah, Texas might pride itself in guns and ownership, but other countries don't. And that's totally cool. Naturally, as a Texan, I like having a couple guns.
So what it's like for you, man? You've done 10 years. You're on your third tour of duty.
Well, I probably mentioned this before, but you've seen the gray hairs in my beard?
No, I can't see any, man.
I shaved it so you can't see it.
Not like mine, dude.
It's getting, it's a long time to be in the space. A really long time. And in fact, you almost don't see many people last that long because like they either made a lot of money or most of them didn't make a lot of money. They sold. That's what I think is a funny thing about OGs is everyone assumes they're like billionaires.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, most sold, and I did not, but most sold when Bitcoin hit 1,000 because they had and this is a true story of a friend of mine. He had 1,000 Bitcoin. He never really believed. He's from the 13 era. Never really believed. He's kind of into it. Not really though. And so when it hit 1,000, he sold it all because he was a millionaire.
All of it.
Well, he's a millionaire for the first time and his family's not from wealth.
Uh-huh.
And so they don't understand that $1 million isn't like, retirement. They're a millionaire now and they're maybe the wealthiest person that they know. Because Bitcoin didn't attract the super wealthy or the high income folks or anyway, it just attracted a wide variety of people, but a lot of them were kind of tinkerers, torrenters, buying stuff in Silk Road, engineers. So it wasn't necessarily like a, white collar, high income sort of like group. And a lot of them sold because they one, never truly believed in it, and two, they had made money that they thought was life-changing. For me, I was like, well, there's the only time I'd ever even consider it is Bitcoin has to hit trillions in market cap where it starts to touch my investment thesis of gold that you would even want to consider that. I still want to hodl for forever. But if you were someone who wanted to take money off the table, that's what you would do. Is like you enter your investment thesis and like, why would you sell at any point between now and when Bitcoin becomes digital gold? Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. My maybe it's my age, but my goals have changed as well. Like, of course, like anyone younger in my 20s, I wanted to be rich. I want to be a millionaire. And now it's like, actually, no, like an old man, I want longer term security and control of my time. Buying stuff never really makes you happy. Things, I mean, some do, like, but it's more about longer term security and control of time.
Yeah, I think this is like a good journey into like long term hodling, like the mindset. What's kind of funny is like I don't really consider any of my Bitcoin money. It's my Bitcoin, and I'm not selling it. So it's like that's where people have criticized me for lending. But I'm like, if I never want to sell, then what am I supposed to do? I can't have a time preference of 0 and then just die. And I need to utilize them at some point, but I don't ever want to sell them. And so that's like my method of like taking some risk, and, you know, taking that and living a lifestyle. But it's funny because I don't really consider it my money. It's just, I've hodled so long that it's there, but I don't touch it. Like I'm not going to sell it. It's not like I think of it as like an active pool of wealth that I can go use for anything else. Like dollars in my bank account. Sure. I'm like, okay, cool. I can go do this with that or that with that. I can go buy this investment or that investment or buy this home or something like that. But with Bitcoin, I don't think about it like that at all. It's just like, I'm never touching this, and it's a sizable amount, but I'm not ever going to touch it.
Fair play, man.
But yeah, I mean, the long-term hodling, though, it just kind of changes. A lot of Bitcoiners have talked about time preference, like long-term hodling and time preference. It does change that to some extent. And a lot of people, when they're younger, never really saved any money. So Bitcoin may be their first time like saving and investing in general. I think hodl is a bigger philosophy than just Bitcoin. It's a lifestyle. It's an investing lifestyle that everyone should have. All the great investors have a hodl mindset. Active day trading is almost impossible to win unless you are one of the great hedge funds or something. And you have information no one else has. Mm-hmm. But being a small investor, your best chance is to buy and hodl. You have reduced fees. You reduce your time preference, and sometimes, you know, depending on the asset, it compounds. And so I think that like that sort of mindset has bled over into other investments. Because Bitcoin isn't my only investment. You know, I haven't sold any, but I still make money doing other things, and I need to have something else outside of Bitcoin. Otherwise, you know, it's been 10 years that I've followed Bitcoin. I need to own some other stuff, like a home someday. I've only rented my entire life. You know, these are, I think, reasonable things to own as other investments.
And now you can get yourself a Bitcoin mortgage, which is super interesting.
Yeah, the Bitcoin mortgage stuff is super cool. And in terms of like the long-term hodler financial toolkit, you've got all these different ways where like you've hodled for a long time. Well, what do? You can lend it out. You can write covered calls. You can borrow against it, like Unchained Capital, or let in. And then there's also like Bitcoin mortgages, which there's Ledin came out with one, and who are the other companies?
I know Arbro, because I've got one coming because we spoke to Bill about it.
There's a couple now.
Yeah.
And so the Bitcoin mortgages are really cool. And I actually went through this process very recently about trying to get a mortgage. So mortgage companies don't care how much assets you have at all. They want to see income.
Yep.
And they want to see stable income. They want to see income over the last 2 years. And also you need 2 years worth of business income. And so they take somewhat of an average of that. Then they take your monthly mortgage payment and divide your income, you know, to have that as the numerator, income as the denominator. And it gives them a debt to income ratio. They don't care if you have 100 million in the bank. That will not help you qualify for a mortgage. It was the most bizarre process I've ever gone through, where I'm like, in these couple of accounts, like I'll identify one Bitcoin one, like the ones I use to earn a yield. Those are public. I publicly talk about those. I'm like, there's this many BTC there. And I'm like, here's also my brokerage account. And, you know, that cumulative value is greater than the mortgage's value. And they're like,
don't care.
We don't care. I'm like, I could literally pay off the mortgage tomorrow. And they're like, we don't care.
But if you have a letter from an employer that says you earn X thousand a month, even though you could lose that job.
You could lose that job like tomorrow.
That. Yeah.
Of course.
It's ludicrous.
It's ludicrous. And so hence the Bitcoin mortgage product for Bitcoiners like myself who have really struggled to get a Bitcoin or to get a mortgage in general. I did get qualified. I found one place that will qualify my Bitcoin as income.
Interesting.
They'll divide it by 84. So you take your total sum of Bitcoin, you have to have it at a custodial exchange. They don't touch it. They just verify it once and you can move it back off.
Interesting.
So they don't custody the asset, which is really cool.
Why 84? Is that what they think the maximum drawdown is?
7 years. It's some of their risk calculations of like some, I forget what the term is called, but they actually do it with traditional mortgages too. But they normally divide by 360, which is the total number of months for the mortgage. This one, which is like basically makes any investment worthless because you divide it by 360 and how much is that per month?
Well, the really interesting thing about the Ledin product, because I saw it the other day, is that I imagined when the first mortgage products would come out, it would be, all right, you want to buy, I don't know, say $1 million house. You're going to require $2 million of Bitcoin locked up, having the 50% LTV, right? And that's what I assumed, but they're not. They're doing a combination. They're taking the value of the home and then part of the Bitcoin. So you can get a much larger home with a smaller amount of Bitcoin as you've got the deposit. And the good thing about that, it gives you can use your asset to get a larger property. The interesting thing is they're essentially going to have to get into the world of foreclosures potentially.
Yeah, so some of these details are still kind of being worked out. Like, I don't believe the Let-In product is live yet.
It's on their website.
It's on their website, but I think it's more of like request to
try
it out. And I believe it's coming out first in Canada, and it's not available in the US yet because I hit them up and asked.
Right.
They're a sponsor of mine, by the way, full disclosure. They're a sponsor of mine, and I've tried out their product, and I've looked at some other ones as well. So with these Bitcoin mortgages, there's a couple types. The one you talked about, I think, is really cool, where you have the mortgage component. So they have to work with an underwriter for that. And then the loan is for your down payment. So down payments can be range from 4% to 20%. Depends on the property, depends on your risk. And so let's say it's 20%. They'll have you post Bitcoin as collateral, and then they'll essentially, pay that mortgage. They'll pay the down payment, and then they'll also bundle that with that mortgage, which is really cool. Some of these companies are also claiming that when you borrow against your Bitcoin to pay the down payment, that it's not margin, and that you won't get margin called, which is a little bit mind blowing, because I'm like, well, how would you do that? And I don't think Let-In's product does it. I believe there is a margin call. So what they do is they also own the title to the home, where if they own the title to the home too, like they're part of the mortgage underwriting process as well, to where instead of like outsourcing the mortgage underwriting process, they somehow have a lien or ownership over the home as well. So they have your home and your Bitcoin as collateral and so they're like, well, even if the Bitcoin value went to zero, the home value, we hypothesize, might not. So you wouldn't get margin called on your Bitcoin, which is kind of cool.
Well, it just kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Now, typically when I dug into how these work, so I don't think Let-In doesn't do that. Let-In, you can still get margin called. What I realized how some of these work, though, I mean, they're taking your Bitcoin and they're doing stuff with it, of course, to earn a yield on it. And to make, because they gave dollars to this other company, and they had to borrow those dollars at a certain cost.
Yeah.
So they have to have some sort of way to plug that gap. So Bitcoin mortgages, I think, are a huge financial innovation in the space. Really powerful for Bitcoiners. It does mean locking up your Bitcoin with someone, and somewhere we're gonna have to trust them for a very long time. That's a big if, and that's a big risk. And with some of them, I try to configure a custom arrangement, where I'm like, how about I go do it at Anchorage? And then we have a tri-party agreement where they can liquidate it at a certain level, because I don't trust you, frankly. Like over 30 years, it's a long time. That's a normal mortgage term. So yeah, that's the tricky part, is you've got them holding your Bitcoin for a very long time. Depends on how they construct it. If there are margin calls, well, you better make sure that you don't hit that. Because if you get margin called, you could not only lose your Bitcoin, but you could lose your home too. Yeah. Which is like a double whammy.
But these products are going to mature. They're going to figure them out.
They're going to figure them out. I think it's a huge innovation. It's needed because a lot of Bitcoiners don't want to sell. They don't want to sell their Bitcoin and buy a home, but they want a home. I'm like the perfect ideal candidate. And so for me, it's just kind of figuring out like which one's the right one for me. And unfortunately, Let-In's not available in the US. I know those guys well enough to where I'd feel somewhat comfortable. 30 years is still a long time, though. I'd prefer something where there's like a custodian that holds on to it. Even a custodian, though, better hope they don't get 6102'd, having the state ask them to seize your assets. So there's a lot of risk with this. So I think if you're listening to this, it does solve a problem, but it has inherent risks with how you do it.
It's just a different risk model.
Of course.
You got to be fully aware of it, understand what you're signing up to. But maturity in the market for financial products from around Bitcoin is certainly something which is going to help take it forward.
Absolutely. I think the maturation of Bitcoin financial products has been fantastic. We've got like Bitcoin mortgages. We have lending out your Bitcoin, borrowing against your Bitcoin. These didn't even exist before 2018. Mm-hmm. Like that was a whole different era back then. You remember this. I mean, these were new, innovative products. You've also got some that are like selling puts or selling calls as a yield generation strategy and doing that in an automated way, like atomic finance. Like those are really cool too. Of course, people should know the risk that they're getting into when they do this. But with every investment, including hodling, which is going long, it comes with risks. just understanding those risks and which ones you think are worth it.
All right, man. Well, listen, Dan, always good to talk to you. I'm glad we get to do it in the free state of Texas.
You mean not the state, the country of Texas.
The country of Texas.
The country of Texas, yeah.
Wow, bold statement.
It is. Hey, Peter, great talking to you. Glad to have you here, and we're definitely going to do some barbecue.
Yeah, tell people where to go. I mean, look, go to, is it danheld.com?
Yeah, danheld.com if you want to check out kind of my background and some of my blog posts. The Held Report is where I write kind of my fresh ideas every single week. So theheldreport.com, that's where I'll post kind of like my most recent weekly thoughts there around various Bitcoin topics. And then, of course, if you want my quick hits, if you want to have like my quick hit takes on Bitcoin, it's on Twitter @danheld.
All right, man. Listen, keep going. You're one of my best friends in Bitcoin. Known you for a long time. Appreciate everything you've done for me. Keep stacking. Keep cool, man.
Thanks for having me, Peter. Cheers.